Why is this couple smiling? Perhaps they found hope, meaning, and purpose in the book of Revelation. Nearly 2,000 years ago, a lonely man on a distant island received a remarkable vision. Some readers have been frightened by his vision, but many more have found in it the hope, meaning, and purpose they were looking for. And now, here are your hosts, Dr. John Pauline and Dr. Graham Bradford.
Hi, I'm John.
And I'm Graham.
And we welcome you to Revelation, Hope, Meaning, Purpose. We've come now to chapter 20. Again, one of those parts of the book of Revelation that people find mysterious and difficult to understand. The 1,000 years, sometimes called the Millennium, which is drawn from the Greek word for 1,000 years. Chapters 13 through 19 focus particularly on the events at the end of time leading up to the second coming of Jesus. But with Revelation 20, the Millennium, we actually move beyond the second coming of Jesus. And we look at a period of 1,000 years that comes between that time and the final end of all things. Now, involved in these things are a couple of resurrections. One resurrection comes at the beginning of the 1,000 years, another one at the end. You may remember, if you watched the last program, that we talked about the fact that elsewhere in the New Testament, you don't find this millennium. Elsewhere, things end at the second coming. It's that two-dimensional look. And here you get more of the three-dimensional look. Let's take a look at one of those earlier passages, John chapter 5 and verses 28 and 29. Do not be amazed at this, for a time is coming when all who are in their graves will hear his voice and come out. Those who have done good will rise to live, and those who have done evil will rise to be condemned. Now, if you looked at that passage in its isolation, you would say, this is a moment of time. There will come a time when everyone who's ever been in a grave will hear his voice and come out. Some will come out to a righteous reward. Some will come out to an evil harvest. So just looking at John 5, there's no 1,000 years in between. There's no sense of any time gap in between. But then you get to Revelation 20, and suddenly these two resurrections are separated. Let's have a look at that. Revelation 20 and verses 5 and 6. The rest of the dead did not come to life until 1,000 years were ended. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy are those who have part in the first resurrection. The second death has no power over them, but they will be priests of God and of Christ and will reign with him for 1,000 years. So clearly here, the first resurrection is a positive one.
Sure. People
are rising up, they're going to be with God, they're going to be reigning with God and so forth. But at the end of the 1,000 years comes another resurrection. What would that be? Clearly from John chapter 5, that would be the resurrection of the wicked. And in fact, that's what we see as we read through Revelation 20, that the second resurrection at the end of the 1,000 years is people rising up who have been rebellious against God, people who have done things that have not been good and kind and loving and so forth, and they all come up at the end of the 1,000 years. So there are two resurrections. Interesting enough, in verse 6, it even talks about a second death. So there's not only two resurrections separated by 1,000 years, but there's two types of death as well. So that's something I think we need to explore again.
Sure. And John, would I be right in saying that they often talk about scholars and they say 12 scholars have 13 opinions.
Oh, thank you for that vote of confidence, Graham.
And could it be that scholars have, begun to focus in more what the Bible is really teaching on the subject of death and resurrection. You know, I seem to perceive in many of the books that I'm reading currently that there is a significant movement back to what the Bible is really teaching about the soul, the spirit, and death and resurrection. Would that be a fair comment?
Well, let me first say that the 13 opinions and so forth. It's okay to laugh at oneself and so on. I think there's an element of truth in that. Scholars don't have all the answers. I mean, there are many things that are challenging for us. The Bible doesn't always address our questions. It was written to another time, another place, addressing their questions. You see, so we don't have all the answers. What scholarship can do, it's kind of almost like a poll. It gives you an idea of what is clear and what is not clear. When a whole bunch of scholars from different parts of the world, different places, different backgrounds, all come together and say, I think this is clear, we have a pretty good idea. When they're all in a different place, then things are much more unclear. So scholarship sort of tells us what's clear in the Bible, what's not so clear in the Bible. One of the things that's come clear, as you mentioned, is in regard to this idea of death and human nature. Traditionally, people, I think, many sincere people have believed, and it came from the ancient Greeks, the idea of the soul and the body as being two separate things. That somehow when a body dies, the soul can hover up, or it can go to God, or have some sort of separate existence. And this has been featured in more than one movie in recent days. But scholarship of the Bible has discovered that, and unitedly so, that actually human nature is not separated. There's one nature. When the body dies, the soul dies with it. Where there is no living body, there is no living soul. Our minds don't exist apart from the physical parts of the brain, you see? And Graham, you've done some study in that area. Could you unpack a little bit more what the scholars have been saying?
Sure. I think what you've said is very important about the two resurrections, and between them is 1,000 years, because if you have a resurrection of those who are righteous or in Christ, at the end a resurrection to condemnation, as Jesus said, between you have 1,000 years, then obviously the question must be asked, where are they before the resurrection? It's obvious that they're not in heaven or hell. You cannot get very far with Revelation chapter 20 and the subject of the millennium or 1,000 years unless we spend a little bit of time here first. So let's explore this in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, we have here the resurrection of what happens when Jesus returns. According to the Lord's own word, we tell you that we who are still alive, who are left till the coming of the Lord, will certainly not precede those who have fallen asleep. It talks about those who are dead as being asleep. For the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a loud command, with the voice of the archangel, with the trumpet call of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. After that, we who are still alive and are left will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord forever. So it's very clear that this is something that encourages us. It reads on, therefore encourage each other with these words. John, I find that so encouraging. We will see our loved ones again when Jesus returns and raises the dead back to life again. But it's obvious that those who are dead are asleep. The usual Bible word to describe death is sleep. They're asleep in Jesus till the resurrection when Jesus returns back to this world again. So that's how we can understand what's happening here in Revelation chapter 20. We have these two resurrections, one at the beginning of the 1,000 years and another one comes at the end. So they're sleeping. And Jesus spoke about the resurrection of the just, or the righteous, and the resurrection of the wicked will come, we'll see, at the end of the 1,000 years. Now, let's just think about what Jesus said about death. Jesus said about Lazarus in John chapter 11, our friend Lazarus sleeps, but I'm going to wake him. And the disciples didn't really understand what he meant. And they thought, what do you mean by this? And how are you going to wake him up? And after 3 days, of course, Lazarus had been there in the grave. Jesus called him out of the tomb and he came out. He said, Lazarus, come forth. He didn't say, come down from heaven or come up from hell. He called him out of the grave. And so it's clear this is the usual Bible word to describe death is sleep. For those who are trusting in Jesus, of course, they sleep in Jesus, and they have the hope of the resurrection. So this is all a package here, John. You know, the Bible describes in Genesis 2 verse 7, the Lord God made man of the dust of the ground, breathed in his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being or living soul or a person. The same word in the Hebrew is used interchangeably. Person, being, you know, I'm looking at you, you're a living soul. I can touch you, you know, you're not an airy-fairy ghost. And when you depart, your body, your breath will go out and your body will go back to the dust. And so while you have the body and the breath is going in and out, you have a living person, a living being. There's nothing airy-fairy, ghostly about this whole thing. In the beginning, God made our parents, Adam and Eve, real people, a real place. We'll see later on, our destiny for eternity is real people, a real place. And that's very important to get back to the Bible teaching on this. All right, a correct view of death is important for two very, very important reasons when we go to the Bible. We have here a concept coming across because life is found only in Jesus. Apart from Jesus, we don't have life. And also, the Bible is very clear that spirits of devils will work deceptions, working miracles, and it is possible for demonic forces to impersonate the dead. And always their goal is to lead people away from Jesus, away from their hope in Him, because they think, well, we have life beyond the grave quite apart from Jesus. That is a deception which we'll find comes through at the end time. And so, in Genesis chapter 2 and verse 17, we have this threat made to our parents. But you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat of it, you will surely die. That was a threat. He didn't say, your body will die, but you'll come and live with me in paradise. That's no real threat, is it? You will die. Death is really death. But notice the first lie coming out in Genesis 3 and verse 4. Here is the first lie in Scripture. You will not surely die, said the serpent to the woman. And so he's been trying to convince the human race ever since that death is not really death. And so let's keep pursuing this point through on the screen, because we are following through a very, very important subject here regarding death and what is happening. Let's look at what Jesus said about hell. Jesus said in Mark 9 verse 48, their worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. Now the usual Bible word to describe hell is a word called Gehenna in the Greek, Hinnom in the Hebrew. And John, I want you to know that I have been to hell and I have come back.
Really?
I have been to hell and I've come back.
Did you take a picture while you were there?
I took a picture. Let's have a look at the picture. There it is. This is the Valley of Hinnom outside the gates of Jerusalem, which was a rubbish dump. And the rubbish was thrown in, and whatever was thrown in was destroyed by the fire, but sometimes an animal carcass on the outside was eaten by the worms. And this is the language Jesus uses and the Bible writers use to describe hell. The fire, the rubbish dump was burning, but it burned till everything was consumed. And there is this concept of an eternal burning hell is something we have looked at before. We'll look at it again too. It is not according to what the Bible teaches. So death is really death. But before we finish, we must look at this very important point. The soul is the whole person, a living being. But what is the spirit? Let's look quickly at this one. The spirit is a little bit interesting because we have this term ruach in the Hebrew, pneuma in the Greek, and can be translated wind, breath, or spirit. Sometimes it's used of the breath, but sometimes it can be used of a person's character or personality. Paul can say, I'm absent from you in body, but I'm present with you in the spirit, as he writes to the people in Corinth. He doesn't mean to say there's some mysterious part of him that he goes across. Okay. I could say that, John, you showed a good spirit, working with me in these programs.
Thank you.
But I don't mean anything apart from you. I mean you, your person, your character. And that's how the Bible can use it too. And so there's nothing mystical about this whole thing. It is a teaching of the Bible that we are complete people. And when we die, our breath goes out. We are lying in the grave, asleep, till the resurrection when Jesus comes. So that's an important background for working through this subject. After the break, we're going to carry on seeing more of what happens during the 1,000 years.
Welcome back. Our focus in this program is on Revelation chapter 20. Would invite you, if you have a Bible handy, to open your Bible to Revelation 20. And we're going to begin by looking at verses 1 to 3. And I saw an angel coming down out of heaven, having the key to the abyss, and holding in his hand a great chain. He seized the dragon, that ancient serpent who is the devil or Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. He threw him into the abyss and locked and sealed it over him to keep him from deceiving the nations any more until the 1,000 years were ended. After that, he must be set free for a short time. So here in Revelation 20, verses 1 to 3, we see the events that are occurring right at the beginning of the 1,000 years. And we have here an abyss. Exactly what that means is something we need to clarify. The angel here is opening up the abyss, and he is stuffing Satan in there, and he's locking it with a big key and so forth. So you see this idea of confinement. Now, the term abyss appears a number of times in the ministry of Jesus. It seems to be a symbol for confining demonic activity, that God is limiting or preventing demonic activity from occurring on the earth. So the question is, what is this abyss? Where is it? Let's take a look at a chart we have here, and that is the things that happen at the first resurrection, at the beginning of the 1,000 years, at the second coming of Jesus. Jesus, of course, returns. And as we saw in the last segment, the righteous dead are raised when Jesus returns. The living saints are raptured. This is the grain harvest in Revelation 14. The wicked are slain. This is the wine harvest that we saw in chapter 14. And the earth is desolated. Satan is bound. Now, in Thessalonians, the saints are caught up into the air. They meet Jesus in the air, but it leaves them there. So the question remains, where do the saints go during this 1,000 years? It's clear that the wicked are destroyed. In other words, those that are not on God's side are no longer there. Satan and his angels are confined in an abyss. Where are the people of God? It's only one place in the entire Bible that gives us a hint of what that is, and that is in John chapter 14 and verses 1 to 3. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God. Trust also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. I am going there to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. Please hold that text right there on the screen, because Jesus here is talking about the events that take place at his second coming. He's in his Father's house, and he's going to return from earth to bring us to the Father's house. He says, I want you to be with me where I am. He doesn't say, I want to come to you where you are. So in John 14, 1 to 3, it makes clear that at the second coming of Jesus, Jesus is not coming to set up a kingdom here on this earth, as some have taught. He's rather coming to gather his people into the air and then take them on up to heaven, and they will be there for 1,000 years while the earth lies desolate. This actually is the basis of the Hebrew wedding. We talked about weddings just a little while ago. Yeah. And I had something to say about that in a private home in ancient Pergamum.
Okay, well look.
I'm standing in what was probably a private home, perhaps a fairly wealthy type of person. As you can see from the fields behind, there's sort of in an open area. So I'd like to think that this was a farmhouse, because it gives us a bit of a setting for a story I want to tell you. You see, in the Hebrew wedding, let's imagine this is the bride's house, okay? And there's a young man the next farm over who's got an interest in this young lady, and what happens is that he and his father would come to the bride's house, and they would negotiate the engagement, negotiate the terms of the marriage and so forth, and then he and his father would return to their house, and then the bride and her father would stay here. While the wedding was being planned and prepared, the son would be over there, he'd be preparing a place for his bride, the home in which they would live on his father's estate. Meanwhile, the bride stays in the house here, and what's she doing? She's preparing herself, getting ready for the wedding. And on the great wedding day, the son and his father and the family, they come back to the bride's house, and they collect the bride, return her to the father's house, and there they have the wedding. Now that Hebrew pattern, I think, is exhibited in Revelation in the story of the Millennium. So this helps us to understand then that during the 1,000 years the righteous are not on earth, they are in heaven. And the question may be, what are they doing up there? Revelation 20 verse 4 gives us the answer. I saw thrones on which were seated those who had been given authority to judge. And I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded because of their testimony for Jesus and because of the word of God. They had not worshiped the beast or his image and had not received his mark on their foreheads or in their hands. They came to life and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. Now here's an interesting combination of features. They have thrones, which sounds like kings. They reign, which sounds like kings, but they also judge. The king and the judge are the same person. An Old Testament scholar, Dr. Roy Gain, will help us understand the ancient context for that verse.
Okay.
Today in Western democracies, we're used to separation of powers. This means, for example, that you have an executive branch consisting of a president or prime minister. You have a legislative branch that makes the laws, and then you have a judicial branch that hears cases. In the ancient world, it was not that way. In the ancient world, you had a king who was an absolute ruler. A monarch was a dictator, and everything was in him. He was the commander of the army, and he was the legislature. He made the rules, he enforced them, and he was the judge. Everything all in one. So King David, for example, was a good king generally, but the people expected to get justice from him. Absalom, David's son, didn't think that David was giving the people justice. So he used to sit by the road or stand by the road leading to the gate of the city of Jerusalem, and he would waylay the people coming in and say, what are you coming here for? Oh, I have a case to present before the judge delegated by the king. Well, he said, there's nobody that the king has delegated for you, so therefore you better talk to me. Oh, that I were the judge in Israel. And if I were the judge, then I would hear your case. And your case sounds like a good and fair one, like you make good sense, and therefore I would be on your side. And this is how he undermined the people. Now, if a king is a good king, this concentration of powers in that king is good. But if a ruler is a poor ruler, then you don't have separation of powers. In the United States or in Australia, where I was born and grew up for a few years before I came here, it's the separation of powers protects people, so that if you have one person who is pushing hard in a direction which may be negative, that person is going to be counteracted by others. But in the ancient world, a king didn't have that kind of counterbalance. So it was bad if you have a bad king, but it was really good if you have a good king, because he can get things done. And that's what Christ is. He's a good king. And he is our king, and he is our judge. And that means that he's going to gain justice. He can follow through on it. That's really good news.
Yeah.
So here you see this joint role is also going to be held by the people of God during the 1,000 years, judging and yet at the same time also helping to rule. 1 Corinthians 6 gives us a small window further into these activities. Do you not know that the saints will judge the world? And if you are to judge the world, are you not competent to judge trivial cases? Do you not know that we will judge angels? How much more the things of this life? So God, in a sense, is during that 1,000 years placing in his own people's hands the privilege of judging eternal things. We've talked about this cosmic conflict. There are larger issues, and somehow the people of God have a special part to play in bringing those things to light and studying out, searching out, even judging those things. And the outcome is in Revelation 15, verses 3 and 4. and sang the song of Moses, the servant of God, and the song of the Lamb. Great and marvelous are your deeds, Lord God Almighty. Just and true are your ways, King of the ages. Who will not fear you, O Lord, and bring glory to your name? For you alone are holy. All nations will come and worship before you, for your righteous acts have been revealed. The final outcome, God has given all space necessary for the people of God to be satisfied that He has handled things fairly.
Sure. So let's think by way of summary of what is happening here now, because we're going to talk about the 1,000 years between the two resurrections. So during the 1,000 years on earth, we find there are no righteous, because those who are righteous are living and reigning with Christ in the Father's house. So they're not on the earth. The wicked are destroyed. There's no preaching happening during this time, because the rest of the dead will not live again till the 1,000 years are finished. And we have corpses and bodies, and you can't preach to a person unless they're alive. The earth is described like an abyss. It returns to almost like it was in Genesis chapter 1 when creation took place, because everything is destroyed. It's just chaos. And Satan is chained by circumstances. He's out of business. He has no one to work on, because the righteous in heaven, those who have followed his lead, are in the grave and don't live again till the end of the 1,000 years. So he's chained by circumstances, we might say. All right, we'll leave it there for the moment and have a break, and come back and see after the break what happens at the end of the 1,000 years. Welcome back. John, I think it's a very important point we need to make here, and that is this. We're going to read a text soon at the end of the 1,000 years which talks about people gathering around the holy city. But last time we left it, the saints had gone to heaven to be with Jesus. Suddenly we find them here on earth in the end of the 1,000 years. And the question is, how do they get there? Well, you have to go to chapter 21 to find out how they get there, because remember, the Bible often takes one aspect of a subject, follows it right through to the conclusion, goes back and tells you another aspect. And chapter 20 is dealing with the events of the 1,000 years. But chapters 21 and 22 are dealing with the New Jerusalem, the new heaven and the new earth. And it's interesting, in chapter 21, twice the New Jerusalem comes down and rests on the earth. So we're going to read a text which is going to have it there, but don't panic, because it's coming up in chapter 21, how it gets there. Okay.
All right, that's very helpful. It's not chronological sometimes, it's topical, jumping through here and there. Let's look at Revelation 20 and verses 7 through 10, which covers the primary events at the close of the 1,000 years. When the 1,000 years are over, Satan will be released from his prison. We know that prison was the desolate earth. He'll go out to deceive the nations in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them for battle. Where do these nations come from? They've just been resurrected. In number, they are like the sand on the seashore. They marched across the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of God's people, the city that He loves. And as Graham mentioned in chapter 21, the city comes down to meet this scene. But fire came down from heaven and devoured them. And the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of burning sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet had been thrown. They will be tormented day and night forever and ever. There's another one of those forever and evers, Graham, which in the Hebrew context doesn't mean forever in terms of days and years, but rather the fire burns long enough to accomplish its
what
task.
It sets out to.
That's right.
Do. Sure, right.
Now, not everything about the end of the millennium is located in these four verses. So let me summarize that. We have a list here of the things that happen at the end of the millennium. First of all, Christ, the saints, and the city descend. We didn't see that in these verses. That was in, as you pointed out, chapter 21. But they are located here. They come here, but they get here by descending from heaven. The wicked dead are raised. Again, that's not said in this passage either, but we find that in verses 5 and 6, where the rest of the dead don't rise until the end of the 1,000 years. So there's going to be a resurrection of the wicked at the end of the 1,000, and then Satan, it says, is loosed. How is he loosed? Well, he spent 1,000 years all by himself here on this earth. Nobody to tempt, no trouble to make. Now suddenly, all the wicked of all time are there available, and he is active once more. Then there's the final judgment. Satan and the wicked are destroyed, and then the earth is cleansed and renewed, and that, of course, is particularly seen in chapters 21 and 22. So in chapter 21, the righteous who have been up in heaven for 1,000 years, they come down in the New Jerusalem itself. And we have a beautiful depiction of this. The New Jerusalem is a cube. Its length, its width, and its height are the same. It comes down to this earth. The wicked are raised. Satan gathers them to try to attack this city, and in the process, God brings a final end. But more than that happens here. There's another type of judgment, isn't there?
Sure. And verses 11 to 15, the last half of the chapter, talk about the points again. It basically goes back and repeats by saying they gather before the great white throne around the beloved city. Of course, they've been gathering there, but this time they come up before the throne and the books are open, and they come up really for judgment. And everybody has their lives examined before that great white throne. This is accountability. This is what Paul obviously had in mind in Romans 14 and verse 11, where he says, every knee will bow. We all come into judgment. No one escapes. Everybody is held accountable. And people, if they have not trusted in Jesus, which is these people, of course, they will be thrown into the lake of fire. That is their destruction. And this is part of the great whole overall picture of the concept of judgment, and my friend Ray Rowenfeld has some good thoughts on this, I think, John, so perhaps we'll hear what he has to say.
A familiar question that people ask is, why is there so much suffering, so much evil in the world? And it's particularly relevant for religious people, including Christians, if we believe that God is all-powerful. Because if God is all-powerful, why doesn't he control things better so that there's no suffering or pain for us? That's been a question that people have asked for a long time. And from a Christian standpoint, we would say that as Christians, as human beings, we're all involved in a great battle between good and evil, between Christ and Satan. And that's brought out, for instance, in Genesis chapter 3, Revelation chapter 12. And so since we're involved in that sort of battle, and God has chosen to fight that battle, we could say, with the force of love rather than force per se, because of that, God doesn't always exhibit all of his power, all of his might in trying to deal with those issues. Rather, he's done it in what we might call a softer, gentler sort of fashion.
Now, one thing that impresses me about this, John, is that God throws it all open. He lets everybody see exactly what has been going on. Nothing's going to be covered that we cannot sort of see, and we'll feel in the end that God, yes, God, we can see it clearly, and the text that you've referred to, everyone will declare that God was fair and just. And so we look at this judgment. The judgment is a very important part of Scripture. Really it is, accountability and God's wisdom. So let's have it on the screen, because there are three aspects to judgment, the final judgment. There's the pre-Advent judgment, which occurs before Jesus returns, because when he comes, remember, he brings his rewards with him. Some people are gathered up, others are destroyed. Then there's a second aspect of judgment when the saints themselves judge the world, and even angels, according to Paul. And there the books will be open for people to inspect and see, God, you are fair in all that you did. And the third aspect, when the wicked themselves are raised back to life again, they gather around the great white throne, the books are open, and now they themselves will see that God was fair and just. And John, it's my conviction that even Satan himself and his angels, the whole of creation, will bow before God and say, God, now we can see the picture. What you've done is fair and just. And this is a part of this whole scene which goes on as to why God tolerates evil and why he lets life go on now. But just think of that scene. Just think of that scene around the New Jerusalem. At that time in history, at that moment, every human being is alive at that one time.
Wow.
It's awesome, isn't it, when you think of it?
Yeah, that's sobering.
Our ancestors and mothers and great-grandfathers and right through the whole of the humanity is alive. Some will be safe inside with Jesus in the New Jerusalem to live and reign with him for eternity as kings and priests. Wow. Eternity is before them. Outside the walls, are those who have rejected Jesus and God's offer of mercy. You know, I believe it's sadness in God's heart to have to destroy these people, but they will never be happy in eternity. The things of this world that made them happy will not be inside the New Jerusalem. And God is determined that happiness is going to be the future of His people. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? Each one of us, one day, you, me, John, Pamela, our loved ones, our children, all of us are destined for that great scene. And we have to make a decision where we're going to be. A very, very important decision will be made now.
Well, I think one question that's been raised in my mind, I think a lot of people may be asking, you talk about this fire that destroys at the end. The big question is, how long does that fire burn? That's the question we'll address right after the break.
Welcome back. We're going to look now at something which is very, very serious indeed. At stake now is the character of God, and probably a misunderstanding of this subject has caused more people that I know personally to become atheists, agnostics, and anything else. The character of God. We're going to look first of all at this text which we mentioned before the break, Revelation chapter 20 and verse 10. And the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of burning sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet had been thrown. They'll be tormented day and night forever and ever. You know, that's a very serious text, isn't it? And throughout most of human history, as far as the church is concerned, the general opinion has been that this fire is not going to cease. It will always burn. And really, when you think seriously about this, it is serious, isn't it? Throughout millions and billions of years of eternity, God is going to torture people, you might say, in hell where the fire is burning and it just doesn't go out. A person who's sinned for maybe 50 or 60 or 70 years or even less is going to burn and burn and burn and burn. And this has caused many people to become angry at God and say, that's a God of love, I hate Him. And so what we're looking at now is very, very important. And John, I'm glad to say too that a lot of scholars now are coming back to understand this, I think, in a more biblical sense than what has traditionally been believed. And a lot of attention has been given to this by scholars over recent times, and I think this is what we need to tap into a little bit of what is happening. So this concept of forever and ever has so frequently been misunderstood. It is an idiom from a previous culture, and if you want to know what the words forever and ever mean, you look and see now how are these words used elsewhere in Scripture. And the Bible will be its own interpreter. It will tell you what it means by forever as you look through. And it's possible for any one of our viewers to take a concordance, look up the word, see it in its original setting, and a Strong's or Young's concordance can help you here and just trace through how do Bible writers use this word. So let's just think a little bit now. If you were to go to 1 Samuel chapter 1 and verse 22, you'd read about a woman, Hannah, who had a child, Samuel. And early, she says that in the chapter, she begins to say here in verse 22 of how she is going to give her child to serve God forever in the temple as a priest. And then later on the chapter, she says what she means in verse 28, I've given him to the Lord for as long as he lives. And that is really the meaning of the word. And then we can go to Exodus 21, verse 6, talking about servants, of how they will serve their master forever. But the meaning in modern translations is brought out for the same word for the rest of their life. And so the concept of forever is a more limited sense as used by Bible writers than what we traditionally give to the word. And so you can do your own study. You don't have to take our word for it, but more and more scholars are saying, let's go back to the original concept, what the culture had back there.
Graham, I just want to say, it seems to me that something going on behind here is that in a strong sense, at least in the Western world, we've been deeply impacted by the Greek philosophy and culture.
Oh, yes.
And the Greek philosophy and culture approaches these things differently. Words like forever have an absolute sense. Whereas in the Hebrew context, as you're bringing out, it's a bit more of this practical sense, as long as necessary, whatever it takes, kind of a thing. So one of the important things as people study their Bibles is to let the Bible interpret itself. If you interpret words by what they mean to you, you might be distorting them.
Sure. And I think hand in hand with what you said earlier about scholars is that many scholars are saying, let's get back to what the Bible really teaches. And that's encouraging.
Yeah.
I think many godly scholars, both men and women, are saying, let's get back to the Hebrew concept and not stay with the Greek concept, which seemed to infiltrate. The Greek concept, very early in Christian history, began to work its way into Christian thought, that the soul or spirit is a separate entity acting and thinking apart from the body and survives the body at death.
Right.
And if you accept that teaching, that it's natural to think the soul cannot be destroyed, therefore it's going to burn never ending.
Right.
But if you understand the biblical teaching, as more and more scholars are coming to accept now, and they're saying, yes, but the soul is a real person. And when you die, the breath goes out and you are dead in the grave. And the usual Bible word is sleep. You are awaiting the resurrection when Jesus comes. It may be you're lying in the grave for who knows how long, centuries, but it seems like a moment of time because you are asleep in Jesus. And that is comforting. I think that's good news, really. People are not being tormented in hell now. They're not in heaven worrying about us on earth. They're lying asleep waiting for the resurrection. But let's carry on the story here, because this concept of never ending comes through often misunderstood. In the book of Jeremiah, chapter 17 and verse 27, we have this concept of unquenchable fire. We'll read the text. But if you do not obey me to keep the Sabbath day holy, by not carrying any load as you come through the gates of Jerusalem on the Sabbath day, then I will kindle an unquenchable fire in the gates of Jerusalem that will consume her fortresses. Well, here again, John, we have this concept of unquenchable fire in the gates of Jerusalem. Well, Jerusalem was destroyed by the Babylonians as prophesied, but the fire is not there, is it? The fire is gone. Unquenchable fire means that nobody is going to put it out. It's going to burn until it's done its job. No human hand is going to stop it. God had a purpose for it. It does its job. And the concept I believe the Bible is teaching us is that the wicked are burnt until they are destroyed. And there's no concept of never ending. Another very important text is Jude, verse 7, where it says here, in a similar way, Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding towns gave themselves up to sexual immorality and perversion. They serve as an example of those who suffer the punishment of eternal fire. So here we have the concept of eternal fire. Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed with eternal fire, but where's the fire, John? It isn't there.
Well, people don't even know where Sodom and Gomorrah were.
That's right.
If the fire was burning, we'd have a pretty good idea.
It's often disputed where they are, sure.
Yeah.
And I think with this concept is another idiom of expression. And if you take your concordance, study it through, let the Bible interpret itself, see how they use their terms, and that's the way we study the Bible. It is not what it means to us today by a word, it's what the word meant to them. And you can do your own study on this too. And in fact, when we look at this chapter, Revelation chapter 20, this fire burns and there is destruction, as we showed in our picture. But look what comes next. A new heaven, a new earth. I mean, the fire that destroys the wicked is not itself never ending, because God uses this as a cleansing agent when He recreates a whole new earth. It's a story of paradise lost, paradise regained. Between it is the history of humanity and sin and death, but God will one day clean the whole thing out and He'll recreate this world. So the point we're making is this: there is no hell now. Your loved ones are not being tormented in hell. No one is enjoying the bliss of heaven. Everyone who's ever died is lying in the grave awaiting the resurrection when Jesus comes. And what a great day it will be when Jesus comes to gather up His people and take them home. Destruction of the wicked for God is a very strange act. But of course, He has to do this because they would never be happy, would they? Never be happy. All right, John, we've got something to come up soon.
That's right. We're going to invite Pamela to join us. And in that context, we'll talk a little bit more about the millennium. But this time, we want to ask whether there's some practical issues that can maybe help us with our lives today. after the break. Graham and I have joined Pamela here in these more comfortable chairs, and Pamela's been listening to the presentation, taking a look at Revelation 20, and was there something you wanted to ask?
Well, I was thinking about the wicked dead, and God is going to raise the wicked dead. They're sleeping. And why does He wake them up just to wake up and punish them? I mean, they're dead. Why not let them sleep? You know, wake them up and punish them. What's the point of that?
Sure. I guess, Pamela, the big picture is important here. The whole great controversy theme of why does life go on anyway? I mean, God tolerates a lot of things, doesn't He? But there is to be accountability. As we have lived our lives, so one day we have to give an account for it. And you know, when they're raised back to life again, eventually they come before the great white throne, and the books are opened. And it's most natural to think here that they are being held to account. And just like the big thing in the issue, the biggest issue really here is that God must not only be just, He must also appear to be just. And we saw earlier of how before Jesus comes, how there's a pre-Advent judgment, which is involved with the wisdom and righteousness of God in accepting some people and rejecting others. There is during the 1,000 years when the righteous get to heaven, and you know, if you got to heaven, and you found out that Hitler was your next door neighbour, how would you feel?
Not too comfortable.
You start to question a few things.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think we're in for a lot of surprises. We're going to get some big surprises during the 1,000 years when we look and see, who's here and who's not there. And so the books are open, and the saints themselves, it says in 1 Corinthians 6, are able to make judgment in the sense that they will see that God is right and fair and just in His dealings. All right.
That's a good point. I think a lot of people are going to have questions. You know, where was God when I needed Him?
Yeah.
People in experiencing this life, they don't have that cosmic perspective. It's going to take some time for us to weigh everything that took place, get a sense of what happened in our lives, grapple with these things. So this judging concept that we talked about, I think, is very significant. We're having a look at how God handled things, a look at the people that were there. You know, why is this person here?
Yeah.
You don't really think Hitler's going to be my neighbor, because I'm going to be with her, you know. So if that's her neighbor, it's my neighbor too. We're going to leave that with God.
I was using an extreme example.
Absolutely. We'll leave that with God. But probably more seriously will be the questions of how come Mom isn't there?
Yeah.
Or how come the preacher isn't there?
That's right.
And so there's got a lot of questions that we're going to have.
I believe this is so important in the mind of God, because, you know, in eternity, no one is going to be happy if we didn't think that God was fair and just. Heaven would never be heaven. You think of what God could do with us if He had a bad day. You know, we have good bads, and God's got a bad day. Keep out of His way. I mean, where do you go? Our happiness very much depends upon us feeling relaxed with God, that He is on our side. He's the best friend we've got, and recovery will take place during that time. Do you think that you'd find that helpful? What sort of things would you want to recover from?
Well, probably a lot of things. So recovery is, well, you'd probably ask me what recovery means.
Right.
Recovery will be recovery, if I can use the word in the definition, recovery from the past, things that have hurt one in the past. And in this life, imagine everyone has something to recover from, because we've all had our feelings and our emotions hurt, and so we all have something to recover from, something to get back to normal to. So recovery happens in a lot of different ways. It's not just an event that happens, it's a process that happens. And it can happen in a number of ways. And a number of people can help us with our
You've
issues.
got counseling, I think. Counseling helped you quite a bit.
Counseling has helped me a lot, and
Sure.
and
Me too, I'll admit it.
Yes, my husband has gone to counseling too, and
She sometimes thought I needed it more than her.
yes,
Yeah.
and I've said also that not all counselors are created equal.
Yeah.
You might go to one counselor and it's not a good fit,
Yeah.
you know, and you say, well, you know, you have to say, well, I'm sorry, but this is not working out, and then find a different one that does work.
Sure. But time helps, and proper counseling, and probably seeing eventually, I guess, that God has been there even when I didn't know. God was guiding me in my life, even when I cried out, "Where were you?" I think this will happen during the 1,000 years.
I believe that too, because there's two things in Revelation that give me that impression. One is the tree of life has leaves for the healing of the nations. This is in eternity now. This is during the 1,000 years. Second, it says God will wipe away all tears from their eyes. After they've gotten there, God will future wipe away all
the
tears. So there's evidently a process.
Yeah.
The Millennium is a wonderful doctrine indicating that questions we have now, issues with the past that we may have, we're going to have time and opportunity to work them out with the greatest counselor of all, Jesus Christ.
And meanwhile, we live our Christian life, as it were, like little children, exercising faith that one day God will make all things clear. Things that puzzle us and worry us now, it'll all be cleared up in the end. And I want to talk to our viewers who are watching this program at this time to think seriously about this subject, that awesome scene. The dead are raised up to life again, the number of whom is like the sand of the sea. They gather around the New Jerusalem. You know, great men and women, famous people, people whom the world has applauded, but people who gave not a moment of their time for God. They rebelled against God. Many of them refused God's offer of love and mercy. And now all they have to face now is destruction by fire. You know, some families will be split up. Some will have husbands and wives inside the New Jerusalem while they are outside. Some parents will look out and I guess their children are outside the city. It'll be a very, very... We're all destined there, aren't we?
Yeah.
We're all destined there, inside or outside. And I want to assure you, the things that matter so much now will mean very little to you then. Make your decision that one day you'll be inside that New Jerusalem with your loved ones, with your children. Surrender your life to Jesus and make sure of your place in that New Jerusalem. Thank you for watching our telecast. It's been a pleasure meeting with you again. Next coming up, what will we do for eternity?
If you've enjoyed this presentation on the Book of Revelation and would like more information, visit www.revelation.hope.meaning.purpose. You can purchase your own DVD set of this series or the booklets, which cover the content of each program.